Hello, hello my friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space and my two new Christmas background additions to the holiday card series. Just cuz. So today's card features some adorable Trinity Stamps product, the hot foil plate I've used in previous videos, and then I used this super cute stamp set called Freezin Family. I showed this when I did the release and review of Trinity's holiday release, which I will have linked. At the end of the video in the end screen if you missed it. And yeah, Spectrum Noir TriBlend coloring, some hot foiling, some ink blending, and I pulled out another oldie but goodie favorite product, some stickles. I talked about this in a recent video that finally ordered some new bottles of stickles because I hadn't used it in years, and I remember how much I love this stuff. So keep watching and I will show you guys how I made this card. So my first step in making this card was to pull out my MISTI and some of Simon Says Stamps smooth white cardstock, and I'm going to stamp the little Freezin family onto it with Simon's Intense Black ink, which is a alcohol marker friendly ink. And since this is a brand new stamp, I'm going to have to ink it up, stamp it a few times. Especially, this is not only a brand new stamp, there is a lot of detail in this stamp. So I'll just keep inking it up and stamping it till I get all that detail. When you stamp multiple times with any alcohol marker friendly ink, I do recommend either just giving it a good long time to dry or heat setting it, because you've got so many layers of that ink sitting on the cardstock. That's more often than not why you'll experience any smearing with your coloring, because there's just more layers of ink and they're not fully dry yet. So after I stamped it, like I said in the intro, I'm using my Spectrum Noir TriBlends to color. And right this second, this is real time, but now it is super sped up. I do not color this quickly at all. It takes me a lot longer than I show in my videos to color, but that would make my videos too long. I do real-time coloring, or I have the coloring videos in real time. Those are on my Patreon page for my Patreon supporters. It's just kind of one of the perks they get. But I kept the coloring pretty basic. I have the caps of the markers I used on screen there, and I used both the brush nib TriBlends as well as, like right now I'm using one of the little like bullet nibs, because I have both just because I started with the little bullet nib ones, and while they're not my favorite to color with, like I'm just, after all these years, I prefer a good brush nib. However, they all work great, honestly. And yeah, I've got all the sets, because you guys know me. I have to have all the colors and all the things. Otherwise, my life is not complete. Do you need them all? No, you don't. You don't. You really don't. And if you've got Copics, do you need these? No. There's a lot of options now for good alcohol markers. I switch between these and my Copics back and forth just cause. I've got them. Why not? And then with all of the coloring, I'm doing my typical just darkest to lightest. That's also just what works for me. If you are newer to alcohol-based markers, regardless of the brand or type, lightest to darkest gives you much more control and is a good way to, begin. That's how I started and what I did for many, many years. And then I forget even why I started doing darkest to lightest. It just works for me, So you have less control when you do darkest to lightest, because you can't, it's a lot harder to take it away, if that makes sense. So if you add too much, of a dark shade, it's a lot harder to, blend and move it around, etc. So I also used, the only other extra I used was the Copic colorless blender. Apparently there is one for the Spectrum Noirs. I don't have it. I still haven't even bothered to look into it because I just use my Copic one. It works. It works the exact same with these. So I used it here and there to do blending on the little bunny, because I'd added some little warm grays to him. And then I'd got a splotch of the orange on that one snowman on the far left there of the orange. And I just used my colorless blender to press that deeper into the cardstock. And then I just kept working my way through it. Like I was grabbing markers at random. I was not worried about any sort of like color combo or anything for this card. I just let these images be colorful because I already knew, like I had my background planned out, everything, and I wasn't going to add other elements, etc. So I was like, whatever. Let's just make these guys colorful. You know, they've got all their little accessories and outfits and everything. So I just went to town with it. Another idea I had, which I didn't have time, would be these would be really cute stamped onto like craft cardstock or white heat embossed specifically on craft cardstock. And then you only need to add just little touches of color. You wouldn't even need to fill in the whole thing. You know, you could add little bits of white to their bodies for the snow. And you could use, you know, color pencils to do that, or Ranger Distress watercolor pencils would work awesomely for that. And just little hints of color, you know, so you could make it look a little more folk artsy. And you guys know I love craft cardstock, and I love the look of images on it, especially when you have to color white areas like the little snowman and the ground and whatnot. So that was another idea I had, just passing that along because it would just be cute. You could almost do the same thing though with this, is just stamp it on white cardstock and just add little hints of color. You don't even need to fully color in all of these, you know, accessories, etc. like I'm doing, but just little hints of color, especially if you're making multiples. I don't time myself. People ask every once in a while, you know, like exactly how long did it take to color this, or exactly how long did it take to make this card. One, I do not time myself. The only times I ever actually know is because, one, if I have the actual, like the real-time coloring video of it, I've got a, you know, baseline of how long it took, or if I happen to see it while editing, but I don't time myself. I try not to get obsessed with that. Even though I do this as a job, coloring is therapeutic, you know, and I think once you start watching the clock when you're coloring or crafting in general, etc., you're taking a good chunk of the joy out of it, because it's like, oh, this took too long, you know, or I wasted too much time, or, you know, that's why I kind of rant against watching the clock. I used to do that, and it becomes less fun. So that said, this did take a decent chunk of time because I, you know, went all out with the coloring, and then I added my little white gel pen highlights. And once I was done, I took the coordinating wafer dies to die cut these guys. I didn't remove all those individual, because there's little snowflake stamps in this set too that are super cute. I didn't use those for this, but I didn't remove them from the outside of that wafer die because why bother? All I needed is to die cut the snowmen. So I lined up the wafer die cut it, and then I'm going to hot foil. And I'm using Trinity's Snowfall background hot foil plate that, like I mentioned, I've used this in other videos. I love it. And since I'm doing this in landscape orientation, the hot foil plate isn't quite wide enough, but that's okay because I'm going to trim it down. And then for my hot foil, I'm using Spellbinders Glimmer foil in Opal. This I've also shown in many videos. I love this stuff. I'm pretty sure this is the only Glimmer foil you need to be a little more careful with, because you can't tell, or I can't, what side is the right side, like the pretty side, and what side is the back, because I always say pretty side of the foil facing the plate. So I made sure that after I unrolled it, trimmed down what I needed, that I immediately put the pretty side of the foil facing the plate, and then my cardstock over it. And this time, again, I didn't tape it. I usually go on and on about that. Like, I tape it in place, and the tape makes a huge difference. I still believe it does. But when I'm doing entire backgrounds, there's nowhere to put tape, and this works. So I had my Glimmer hot foil machine already heated up. I put the plate, the foil with the pretty side of the foil facing the plate and the cardstock onto the Glimmer machine. With all the other foils, it's obvious. It's like the gold foil. It's gold on one side, and it's that kind of silvery color on the other. Like, you can always tell what is the pretty side. This opal one is it's just finicky, you know, and you figure it out real quick when you have it wrong, because one, you won't have any foil on your cardstock, and then the foiling side of your plate is just a pretty iridescent color, because I've done that many times with this foil. So now I just try to pay more attention when I'm using it. So I let it heat up. I pressed the timer button. When it was solid, I slowly ran it through my Platinum 6 machine, because the Glimmer machine adds the heat. the die cut machine adds that pressure and presses the foil into the cardstock. And this on white cardstock doesn't look like much. You know, it's kind of transparent, but it's got that little bit of like holographic sort of reflect, and it's the opal foil is just, I love it. So after it was foiled, I cut the piece down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and then I'm doing some ink blending. And I didn't clean off my brush ahead of time, so it still had blue ink from a previous project. So it kind of is a little mucky here. I'm fine with that too, because I'm going to layer up my inks. It's not going to matter. I'm starting with Concord and Ninth Harbor ink. So that's my lightest blue. And yeah, it's a little blotchy and whatnot because there was other blue inks on my brush. And normally I would just wipe that off on a cloth before I started. But again, it's not going to matter because I'm immediately going in with Blueberry, which is a deeper shade. And then my final shade is Midnight. And yeah, just blending those, kind of keeping the center a little bit lighter. It just gives it that little extra something. And just blending around. And because that snowfall background was hot foiled, the foil resists the ink. So once it's done, I just take my cloth and go over it again, just very lightly, to remove any ink that might be sitting on the foil, or on the foiled areas, which sometimes there's a bit, it just depends. So that wipes it off. And now I've got my little snowfall background that's got that just, I love the opal glimmer foil. Anywho, for my sentiments, I'm using some Concord 9th Midnight cardstock, and I put my anti-static powder all over it, put that into my MISTI, and I'm going to use a couple of the sentiments from that same stamp set, and I'm going to ink those up and stamp them with clear embossing ink. Trying not to press too hard because the sentiments themselves are fine lines. And even with my anti-static powder, there was like a spot right by one of the letters where there was just embossing powder clinging to where it just should not be. So I just take a dry brush and just lightly remove those little flecks so that the sentiment is legible, and then melt that with my heat tool. So once everything is smooth, shiny, melted, I remove the excess anti-static powder with my cloth, and then I'm die cutting these with the coordinating wafer dies, because the die set has not only the outline, all the dies for the little snowflakes, but also the little sentiments. Always love that. So I lined up those coordinating wafer dies and then die cut those sentiments. And then my card base is going to be a top folding A2 note card, so 5.5 by 4.25. And I'm going to line up that little Freezin family along the bottom of the inside of my card. And that I'm going to stamp with that lightest blue ink, the Harbor ink from Concord and Ninth. And it's still a pretty vibrant ink. It's not very pale, but I'm okay with that. And I will still write over this. Always get asked that, especially when it's like a large image like this that kind of takes up the bulk of the inside of the card. That's fine. I'll still write over it. Or you can write on like the top portion on the inside of the card, because that's all blank too. Whatever works for you. But I always stamp the insides of my cards with the knowledge that it's like, I will write right over this, So I adhered one of the Heat Embossed and die cut sentiments, and that finished off the inside of the card, and then reinforced that fold with my Teflon bone folder. And then I had this kind of cranberry colored cardstock in my stash, and trimmed that to just slightly bigger than my hot foiled and ink blended background. And then I'm going to adhere that to my card base, and I just use craft tacky glue to adhere those together, and then to adhere that to my card base. Once that's adhered into place, I am going to adhere my little Freezin family. I'm going to adhere that with Simon's Big Mama foam tape. So it's just going to pop them up a little bit, gives me a little bit of dimension, but it's not going to add like a ton of bulk. So got that on the back of this piece, and then peeled off the backing, stuck that onto my card front. And then I decided to do the same thing with the sentiment. Just pop that up with that little bit of foam tape as well. Just that little bit of dimension. And I was going to stop here, because I was like, I know. There's no splatter, there's no bling, but it was like, there's a hot foil background that's gorgeous, all the coloring I did, etc. But then I was like, ooh, stickles. I've got like 5, I'm not even joking, like 5 bottles of it sitting here because I ordered many, because I used to use stickles all the time. Those have been following me for many, many years, like in my old videos, stickles all the way. This is just Stardust stickles. This is a great, like, if you only are going to get one, Stardust stickles. It works for everything. It's beautiful. It's just shimmery, iridescent goodness. And I just added it here and there. Like, I didn't completely cover everything. I was also avoiding the white gel pen areas because adding things like stickles, glossy accents, I've talked about this before, a lot of times will dissolve white gel pen. It's just, white gel pen is basically like water reactive in a sense. So I just kind of avoided the little white gel pen highlights that I had added. And I just added just little thin dabs of the stickles. The thinner you apply it, the faster it'll dry. It doesn't take that long to dry, but yeah, if you apply it thin, it also doesn't create, like, you can add it kind of in blobs if you want, and it'll be a little more dimensional, but it dries a lot faster if you add it thin. So I just added just tiny little dabs of it here and there all over. The snowmen are going to be sparkly. Their accessories are going to be sparkly because it's a Christmas card. And yeah, look at that shine and that sparkle. It just makes me happy. So that was the card. And like I mentioned in the intro, I will have a link to that release and review at the end of the video. I will also, of course, have a link to my 2023 holiday series playlist. That'll be linked in the end screen as well with all the other videos I've done so far. And I'll continue to add to it as I get more Christmas cards made. And then I will have all the links to all the things in the description box below the video. So my supply list, links to everything I used, etc. That will be directly below for anyone who's interested. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.